stumbled across one entitled The Top 10 Games That Define Razor Fist, which gave me the idea for a similar countdown type video, albeit of a different subject matter. Since my most recent string of movie reviews required me to dive dick deep into the abject abortion that was Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil films, I figured I'd follow that up with something that's actually positive. In summation, here are the top 10 films that define me as a film goer. I think you're going to be a little surprised at what did and didn't make it onto the list. I'd like to start off by admitting up front that I was a total weeboo in my teens, and while I do admittedly remain a Nihongo-phile to this day, it's not quite as pervasive as it was in my younger years, and that kick-started in the year 2005 when I, at the ripe age of 12, rented the film that served as my gateway to anime, Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke. The story itself is simple enough, it's nothing groundbreaking. Yes, it's one of the many animated films of the 1990s that sells a very strong environmentalist message, but what does it say about the strength of Miyazaki's narrative capabilities when, instead of rolling my eyes and raising a compulsory middle finger in the wake of the cartoonish bullshit we were force-fed with Captain Planet, not one person is presented as a clear-cut good guy or bad guy. Every character has their own ideals, convictions, and baggage, and the story unfolds at a steady pace, giving us plenty of time to get to know each one of them and enjoy some of the most fluid animation and some of the most gorgeous art ever put to film. When the ending credits roll, I don't find myself reaching for the remote to shut it off or shrugging indifferently with an it was okay for an environment flick. No, I find myself needing to sit back, take stock, and process just how much I'm actually enjoying it. That right there is the mark of a great film. Next. When you ask a John Woo fan which of his films is their favorite, most of them will likely say it's either The Killer or Hard Boiled. And while both are fantastic films for my half a dollar, the crowning achievement of Woo's career arrived in, oddly enough, the same year Princess Mononoke was released onto the world in 1997, Face Off. Combining Woo's trademark themes of honor and brotherhood with his propensity for melding dramatically engaging crime drama and high-intensity action sequences with the low-key sci-fi of two characters on complete opposite sides of the law as well as morality, completely swapping identities and being forced to assume their counterparts' lives. It sounds confusing on paper, but Woo's masterful direction, aided in no small part by the outright show-stopping performances of leads John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, ensures that the audience is never once left in the dark, provided they actually bother to pay fucking attention to the events transpiring. Lick my nuts, Opie and Anthony. Next. I'm sure you're thinking it should be Enter the Dragon, which is also a great film, but in my eyes, the crown jewel of Bruce Lee's tragically short-lived career was the film he made before Enter the Dragon, that being The Way of the Dragon. It was Lee's first and only completed stab at the director's seat, as he died before he could finish Game of Death, sadly. It saw Lee venture away from his usual stone-faced emissary of Chinese vengeance in favor of a more lighthearted, comical tone. It was Lee's attempt at encapsulating his entire Jeet Kune Do philosophy into a single movie, and folks, this movie has quite possibly what I and quite a few others consider the greatest fight sequences, the greatest fight sequence number one of Bruce Lee's storied career. Picture, if you will, Bruce Lee fighting a baby-faced, mop-headed Chuck Norris in the Roman Colosseum. A fight scene that, I hasten to add, Lee filmed entirely without a fucking permit to be in the Colosseum. All I can say is thank God he had the balls to shoot it anyway, because it is easily among the most intense 10 minutes of film you and I will ever see. The Way of the Dragon is an undeniable classic, so buy it or go fuck yourself. Next. I know it's shocking that I put a Star Wars movie on here that isn't The Empire Strikes Back, but I'm not exactly one to subscribe to groupthink. Look, I like Empire a lot, but Return of the Jedi happens to be my favorite Star Wars movie. While all of the Star Wars films admittedly suffer from spotty pacing, for example, Empire's opening and closing acts may be undeniably classic, but its middle act moves at roughly the speed of Pizza the Hut on a Ritalin bender. Jedi has perhaps the smoothest pacing of the entire series. The action sequences and character moments are more evened out. The final battle alone, jumping flawlessly between space dogfighting, on the ground combat on the Force moon of Endor, and Luke Skywalker's lightsaber duel with Darth Vader, one of the most personal conflicts in series history, maybe one of the best scenes of the franchise's history, and don't you dare diss my man Wicket. Fuck you, the Ewoks rule. Next. Slasher movies are a dime a dozen, and shitty slasher movies are a dime a couple hundred dozen. Sure, there were movies to lay the foundation, Black Christmas, Hitchcock's Psycho, and Tobe Hooper's original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I firmly believe John Carpenter's Halloween is the definitive slasher film. While later entries in both the subsequent series this movie spawned and its 19 titloads of shallow imitations would devolve into unlikable shitheels being set up for increasingly cartoonish kills, Halloween is a film that relishes in its simplicity. Carpenter and his production partner, the late Deborah Hill, know that you don't need convoluted world building, gross out murders, and an antagonist who sticks out like Terry Crews at a Klan rally. All you need to sell a truly harrowing horror movie is an idealistic setting, a seemingly indestructible force of evil hiding behind a seemingly harmless body, and characters that don't feel at all out of place in the idealistic Midwestern neighborhood. And damn if Michael Myers' very presence doesn't send chills up my spine every time the camera pans over to reveal him hanging out in the background, just waiting for his moment to strike. You can have your Freddy, your Jason, your Ghostface, all you want, because Halloween is the apex of the slasher film, and you should fucking watch it. Next. My favorite film genre is unquestionably the action genre, and the 1980s was a certified gold mine for action, so it's not easy to pin down the crown jewels of the genre. So the next three movies I bring up on this list are a part of what I consider to be the holy trinity of the 80s action films, beginning with Arnold Schwarzenegger's 1985 ass blast that was Commando. Following the high fantasy of Conan the Barbarian and James Cameron's flawless blending of sci-fi action and horror with The Terminator, Commando was the film that cemented Schwarzenegger's status as a Hollywood icon with a dirt simple premise and the film's tongue firmly welded to its cheek. It knows it's a 90-minute joke, but unlike more recent fare like Kingsman or anything Joss Whedon has ever pinched out, this movie assumes you're smart enough to pick up on that. Rather than holding your hand and treating you like a child, the movie focuses on the powerhouse that was 80s Schwarzenegger, with a climax that serves up an endless procession of explosions and bodies being thrown 50 feet back courtesy of machine gun fire, not to mention some of the finest one-liners this buff Austrian bastard has ever dispensed. Among the classics, of course, are the menacing "Remember, Sully, when I promised to kill you last? I lied." The sardonic "Let off some steam, Bennett." And who can forget "I eat green berets for breakfast, and right now I'm very hungry." But for my money, the one-liner to end all one-liners arrives early on in the film. Arnold is put on an airplane with a mustachioed escort courtesy of the movie's villains. He snaps the guy's neck, dresses him up to look like he's sleeping, turns to the stewardess, and utters the words, "Don't disturb my friend, he's dead tired." Steven D'Souza, for writing that line alone, I could actually fuck you. Next. Firmly alongside Commando on the holy trinity of 80s action films, the screenplay for which was penned by Commando scribe Steven D'Souza, Die Hard was a firm reminder to Hollywood that your action protagonist didn't need to be a roided up Captain America clone who gunned down endless hordes of brown people while spouting out rejected James Bond quips. He could simply be an average Joe Schmo, put up against insurmountable odds, left with little to assist him outside of his service pistol, his smarts as a police officer, and rejected James Bond quips. Look, this movie gave us the storied careers of Bruce Willis fresh off his 5-season run on Moonlighting alongside Sybil Shepherd, and Alan Rickman in his cinematic debut is arguably one of the greatest movie antagonists of all time, the slick, smooth, suave Hans Gruber. John McTiernan's direction is airtight, never once dialing back on the intensity, even in the down moments, and I don't give a fuck what Bruce Willis says. Die Hard is the ultimate Christmas movie. I watch this flick every year around Christmas time to get myself into the holiday spirit, and you should too. Next. As great as Commando and Die Hard are, they would not be the films they are if not for the one film resting at the top of the holy trinity of 80s action films, and that film's name is First Blood, the film that cemented Sylvester Stallone, who by this point was already nominated for 2 Academy Awards for starring in and writing the screenplay for Rocky, into the hallowed halls of action movie legend right alongside the likes of John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, and Charles Bronson. First Blood is the purest example of the underdog story Stallone had already shown with Rocky, this time pitting a Vietnam War veteran suffering from severe PTSD against a shitheel small-town sheriff, a conflict that turns the idealistic Pacific Northwest township and its surrounding forest into a domestic war zone. At the core of all the blood and explosions and violence, however, rests a very human story about a war hero abandoned by society, a story that, as somebody who's had family that served in the Vietnam War, hits yours truly extremely close to home. And what does it say about Stallone's acting ability when he can make you cheer while he blows up a hardware store, only to 5 minutes later actually move you to tears as he recalls the traumatic loss of a friend in Saigon? First Blood is without question the greatest action film of the 1980s, and in my eyes, one of the greatest action films of all time. Next. I have a lifelong appreciation for spy fiction. I love spy novels, spy video games, spy television shows, and spy films. And that appreciation began when, at the ripe age of 9, I was first exposed to the James Bond franchise with Goldeneye. Yes, we all love Goldfinger and Skyfall, but my gateway into what has since become my favorite film franchise of all time was Goldeneye. Pierce Brosnan, though his portrayal of 007 gets a lot of shit, was a perfect amalgamation of the best elements of both Sean Connery and Roger Moore's previous portrayals of the character. Though the second Timothy Dalton film, License to Kill, did its best to bring Bond out of the Cold War in the face of new rising threats, Goldeneye would look back to his communist-slaying past by pitting him against a revenge-driven Lienz Cossack looking to send Great Britain back to the Stone Age. And the main villain being a former friend and fellow 00 made it one of the most personal conflicts in Bond's storied history. And lest we forget the movie's powerhouse of an opening theme thundering through your television speakers courtesy of the scorching hot vocals of Tina Turner. Goldeneye is the Sistine Chapel of the Bond series, so buy that shit. Next. There are good movies, there are bad movies, and there are Resident Evil The Final Chapter bad movies. Jurassic Park is a movie so skull-smashingly good that I find myself appreciating it even more now as an adult, having read Michael Crichton's original novel and fully read into the overarching themes that inspired it. Crichton's novel was a seamless blend of sci-fi, horror, and adventure, as well as a cautionary tale against the dangers of mankind screwing with the laws of nature through genetic engineering, in this case, scientists bringing dinosaurs back from extinction. Steven Spielberg's film, more or less, took Crichton's story and streamlined it into an adventure story that contains just as much awe and wonder as it does moments of pure terror. Couple that with a flawless combination of both practical and CGI effects to the point that at times it's actually hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The effects still hold up to this day, even when put against movies with 9 trillion times the budget Spielberg did, and the movie is packed to the rafters. With an ensemble of natural actors that runs laps around the soup sandwiches we see in 99.5% of the blockbusters of today. Jurassic Park was the movie that got me into movies. It's a film that I've watched more times than any other film on this list, and is without question my favorite movie of all time. Well, I hope this was an illuminating video for you all, giving you a glimpse into my taste in cinema, and I'm curious to know what movies define you all, so leave those lists in the comments below.